Om Namo Narayana, Jai Swami Narayan, Namaste. Welcome back. Today we're looking at Canto 5, but before we do, just a little aside, because I'm reading a novel right now, which I'm really enjoying. It is called Kalki by Gore Vidal. And yes, I know, that's backwards. This is the camera I don't like to use. And I really like Gore Vidal. His book Messiah is probably in my list of the top 20 favorite novels that I've read in my life. His writing style is kind of interesting, and he is kind of an interesting guy. This particular book is about a woman who has been asked to go to India and report on this guru who believes he is Vishnu. So actually, he's not even a guru, he is Vishnu. And he has declared that the world is going to end soon, and he has a big event at Madison Square Garden where he will be revealing the end of the world. And there's a subplot here where the government is trying to go after him as a drug pusher. So, what does she discover? What is happening? Who is this guy? And it's a really fast-paced action novel. And I really have to give kudos to Gore Vidal for doing his research and really studying Hinduism legitimately and just not relying on stereotypes. Even though the character his name is Kalki in this, because he's the final god who is going to be on this earth, even though Kalki reminds me a bit of John DeRuyter, kind of described in the same way, and sort of that vacant look. At the same time, though, the wives of Kalki, he has two of them, kind of remind me of stories that I've read, the wives of Aditya Samraj. There's stories by Aditya's first wife that really sound like what's in this book. So there's a sense of reality here that I can completely connect with. And the things Kalki says and the way they discuss stuff it's really good. The only problem is the woman who is this journalist who's investigating him, she says, yes, over the last few weeks I've been reading all the Vedas and Upanishads and all the texts. And I'm like, yeah, there's no way in a couple weeks you've read the Srimad Bhagavatam, the 108 Upanishads, all 4 Vedas. That is literally impossible, given 5 days of those few weeks you were in a hospital, in a coma, So it's like, okay, in 1979 too, getting a hold of this stuff would have been much more difficult. Just to maybe get this stuff might have required shipping and handling from India. That would have taken a month. That is the only flaw I've found with this. Okay, the reason I'm mentioning this is there was a line that I really liked that I was reading this morning, and I was just like, oh, that's a perfect line, and I just want to share it with all of you. The line is, the woman has seen a lot of Kalki's followers on the sidewalk. They're kind of painted as Hare Krishnas, giving out pamphlets and paper lotus flowers. And the line is, if you go to one of their classes, they teach you all about the Vedas. You learn a lot about the beginning of the Vedas, and then the end, how it all ends. But she says, you don't learn about the middle. And I thought, oh, that is so cool. Wow. Gore Vidal, for someone who is a famous atheist, wow, that's really great. And sometimes I think that's how we approach the Srimad Bhagavatam, believe it or not. Book 1 talks about Lord Krishna, and we all know that story. And then you'll see teachers touch on this canto, or this canto, or this canto, or they'll talk about how the earth was created, or then they talk about something else. There's 12 books here. There's a lot here, and yet we often, I think, do miss that middle. I certainly felt that when I was recording my videos for the Ramayana, having read an abridged version of the Ramayana and then doing all 7 volumes, I was like, wow, so much has been left out here. I was like, that's great. Yes, that's exactly why this channel is here, to find the middle. I don't know if that could be the new tagline for this channel. I'm here reading the scriptures to find the middle. I don't know. Anyways, this is a really fun book by Gore Vidal. I do recommend it. It's so great that I went and ordered a bunch of other of his books, Creation, 1876, and Burr, because I really like Aaron Burr. Yeah. Anyways, today we're looking at Chapter 11, the middle, of Canto 5, Jaḍa Bharata Instructs King Rahugana. So, enough of my rants. Let's now turn to the words of Jaḍa Bharata, who was speaking. My dear king, although you are not at all experienced, you are trying to speak like a very experienced man. Consequently, you cannot be considered an experienced person. An experienced person does not speak the way you are speaking about the relationship between a master and a servant, or about material pains and pleasures. These are simply external activities. Any advanced, experienced man, considering the absolute truth, does not talk in this way. My dear king, talks of the relationship between the master and the servant, the king and the subject, and so forth, are simply talks about material activities. People interested in material activities, which are expounded in the Vedas, are intent on performing material sacrifices and placing their faith in their material activities. For such people, spiritual advancement is definitely not manifest. A dream becomes automatically known to a person as false and immaterial, and similarly, one eventually realizes that material happiness in this life or next, on this planet or a higher planet, is insignificant. When one realizes this, the Vedas, although an excellent source, are insignificant to bring about direct knowledge of the truth. As long as the mind of the living entity is contaminated by the three modes of material nature, that being goodness, passion, and ignorance, his mind is exactly like an independent, uncontrolled elephant. It simply expands its jurisdiction of pious and impious activities by using the senses. The result is that the living entity remains in the material world to enjoy and suffer pleasures and pains due to material activity. Because the mind is absorbed in desires for pious and impious activities, it is naturally subjected to the transformations of lust and anger. In this way, it becomes attracted to material sense enjoyment. In other words, the mind is conducted by the modes of goodness, passion, and ignorance. There are 11 senses and 5 material elements, and out of these 16 items, the mind is chief. Therefore, the mind brings about birth in different types of bodies among demigods, human beings, animals, and birds. When the mind is situated in a higher or lower position, it accepts a higher or lower material body. The materialistic mind, covering the living entity's soul, carries it to different species of life. This is called continued material existence. Due to the mind, the living entity suffers or enjoys material distress and happiness. Being thus illusioned, the mind further creates pious and impious activities and their karma, and thus the soul becomes conditioned. The mind makes the living entity within this material world wander through different species of life, and thus the living entity experiences mundane affairs in different forms as a human being, demigod, fat person, skinny person, etc. Learned scholars say that bodily appearance, bondage, and liberation are caused by the mind. When the living entity's mind becomes absorbed in the sense gratification of the material world, it brings about his conditioned life and suffering within the material situation. However, when the mind becomes unattached to material enjoyment, it becomes the cause of liberation. When the flame in a lamp burns the wick improperly, the lamp is blackened. But when the lamp is filled with ghee and is burning properly, there is bright illumination. Similarly, when the mind is absorbed in material sense gratification, it causes suffering, and when detached from material sense gratification, it brings about the original brightness of Krishna consciousness. There are 5 working senses and 5 knowledge-acquiring senses. There is also the false ego. In this way, there are 11 items for the mind's function. O king, the objects of the senses, such as sound and touch, the organic activities such as evacuation, and the different types of bodies, society, friendship, and personality are considered by learned scholars the fields of activity for the functions of the mind. Sound, touch, form, taste, and smell are the objects of the 5 knowledge-acquiring senses. Speech, touch, movement, evacuation, and sexual intercourse are the objects of the working senses. Besides this, there is another conception by which one thinks, this is my body, this is my society, this is my family, this is my nation, etc., etc. This 11th function of the mind is called the false ego. According to some philosophers, this is the 12th function, and its field of activity is the body. The physical elements, nature, the original cause, culture, destiny, and the time element are all material causes. Agitated by these material causes, the 11 functions transform into hundreds of functions, and then into thousands of functions, and then into millions. But all these transformations do not take place automatically by mutual combination. Rather, they are under the direction of Lord Vishnu. The individual soul, bereft of Krishna consciousness, has many ideas and activities created in the mind by external energy. They have been existing from time immemorial. Sometimes they are manifest in the waking state and in the dream state. But during deep sleep or unconsciousness or a trance, they disappear. A person who is liberated in this life, a Jivan Mukta, can see these things vividly. There are 2 kinds of Krishnajna, the living entity, as explained above, and Lord Vishnu, who is explained as follows. He is the all-pervading cause of creation. He is full in himself and is not dependent on others. He is perceived by hearing and direct perception. He is self-effulgent and does not experience birth, death, old age, or disease. He is the controller of all the demigods, beginning with Lord Brahma himself. He is called Narayana, and he is the shelter of living entities after the annihilation of this material world. He is full of all opulences, and he is the resting place of everything material. He is therefore known as Vyasadeva, Lord Vishnu. By his own potency, he is present within the hearts of all living entities, just as the air or vital forces within the bodies of all beings, moving and unmoving. In this way, he controls the body. In his partial feature, Lord Vishnu enters all bodies and controls them. My dear King Rahugana, as long as the conditioned soul accepts the material body and is not freed from the contamination of material enjoyment, and as long as he does not conquer his 6 enemies and come to the platform of self-realization by awakening his spiritual knowledge, he has to wander among the different places and different species of life in this material world. The soul's designation, the mind, is the cause of all tribulations in the material world. As long as this fact is unknown to the conditioned living entity, he has to accept the material condition of the material body and wander within this universe in different positions. Because the mind is affected by disease, lamentation, illusion, attachment, greed, and enmity, it creates bondage and a false sense of intimacy within this material world. This uncontrolled mind is the greatest enemy of the living entity. If one neglects it or gives it a chance, it'll grow more and more powerful and will become victorious. Although it is not factual, it is very strong. It covers the constitutional position of the soul. So, my dear King, please try to conquer this mind by the weapon of service to the lotus feet of the spiritual master and of Lord Vishnu. Do this with care. And thus ends chapter 11. I had flash in my mind as I was reading this last part, Living in the Material World, the George Harrison documentary and book. Was that also the name of one of his albums? I forget. Oh, I love George Harrison. Because he reminded us all the time in his lyrics exactly exactly what this said. And he helped bring these teachings to the world. Anyways, there's so many things I could say here, but the video is running long due to my introduction. I just would say, in the very beginning, verse 4, it said, as long as the mind of the living entity is contaminated by the three modes of material nature, his mind is exactly like an independent, uncontrolled elephant. And when I read that, I had come into my head gurus that I have seen that are totally living in the material world, and they are totally with goodness or passion and ignorance, or people I know who seemed all wrapped up in one of these things, and yet they proclaim themselves to be enlightened and above all this. And the question is, are they really? Are they really? Or are they like Gore Vidal's book, where they're really just like a drug dealer with some ulterior motive, and they're not really gods? Because according to the scripture, if you're wrapped up in those, you're not spiritual. And spiritual folks will say, oh, well, I'm above even those, so I can present those feelings because I'm above. But very few. 1 in a million. 1 in a million. Alright, we're going to end here. And thank you for hanging out with me, listening to my random thoughts, and listening to the words of our Lord, and praising the Lord through this, and enjoying this Sanatana Dharma. Jai Shri Krishna, Jai Shri Swami Narayan, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. My sweet Lord.